So, today we're going to move on from single-celled organisms, okay, and looking at single cells, to looking at multicellular organisms. All right, and to sort of start that off, we have to look at where did life come from? How did it get to single cells, and why is it now multicellular, and how did all of that occur, and some terminology to do with multicellular organisms and single-celled organisms and stuff like that. The other thing we got to look at is what I promised you earlier on when I said look at the similarities between the plant cell and the animal cell. It must mean that they have a common ancestor and they evolved from some common ancestor, and then I promised you I would tell you why that doesn't contradict what you've learned in religion class. Today's the day I get to do that. All right? So, I'm going to preface that with this. Okay? If you are a fundamentalist, okay, that means you take the Bible to be literal truth. Nothing I will say today will make you happy. Okay? If you are like most Catholics, okay, we accept that much of what is in the Bible is metaphor. Okay, or a comparison or a way to tell a complex concept in a simple way. All right. If you're willing to accept that, then a lot of what I say will make sense. Okay, and you'll probably be able to accept it. Okay, and the reason we accept that obviously is because we know, okay, that Jesus spoke in parables often. Okay, he tried to send a message by telling people stories. All right, the stories weren't ever meant to be taken as this is what really happened. Okay, they were stories that people were meant to hear, listen to, and say, oh, I understand how I'm supposed to act, or how something like that could apply to me. Okay, does everyone follow me on that? All right, so that's what we're kind of going to look at today. So we're going to look at how multicellularity evolved. We're going to look at the role of specialization in multicellularity, and we're going to examine the plant as an animal of a multicellular organism, and from here on out, we'll be talking mostly about plants. Okay? All right, in the Bible, what happened first? Very first thing. Let there be what? Really? Let there be light. That was the first thing. Okay? God separated light from dark. Okay? Well, I would have to think that the Big Bang was pretty bright. I'm just putting that out there. Okay? I would have to think that that was a fairly significant, bright, high energy event. Okay? Next was separating the heavens from the earth. Okay? Well, really, as we know it, okay, the earth formed in a similar way to the way the sun formed through a process called accretion. Okay? What that means is as particles run into each other, they stick together. As more particles stick together, their ability to attract other particles becomes greater by the force of gravity. Gravity is influenced by two things: mass and how far apart things are. The more mass you have, the more things you attract to yourself. That's why the Earth orbits the sun and not the other way around. Okay? In case you didn't know that, by the way, the Earth orbits the sun. Okay? So, this accretion process leads to essentially the formation or early building of the Earth. Okay? Now, we're going to look at it kind of this way here. So 4.6 billion years ago, okay, we have the Earth beginning to form together, okay? And a little bit earlier than that, the sun would have gone through a similar process, okay? So this whole let there be light thing, the sun actually came before the Earth, okay? Hydrogen atoms began to, coagulate together, and as they got heavier and heavier, the pressure increased on them to the point where they were fused together, and that process is still going on. Okay, hydrogen atoms are forced together and fused to become helium. Okay, that is a high energy release reaction. Okay, and that is what powers the sun. All right, so that is the source of all energy for our Earth. Now, the Earth, similar process except not as much hydrogen, mostly rocky material. Okay, that rocky material hits each other. Okay, it gets really hot when it hits and forms kind of a semi-liquid type of sphere. Okay, and that continued for a very long time until essentially the Earth started to cool enough that its surface was no longer completely molten. All right, everybody with me so far? Now, the whole 7 days thing, that's also an analogy. Okay, it's a metaphor. All right. If at the time Jesus lived, if you'd have gone to people and said, the Earth's 4.6 billion years old, it took this many billion years for this to happen, and this many billion years for this to happen, they'd have thrown rocks at you until you were dead. They called that process stoning. Okay? Because they don't, at the time, most people were not educated, were illiterate, okay, and simply had no understanding of complex scientific concepts. Okay? Jesus knew, God knew, that it didn't take 7 days to do all this. Okay? It's an analogy for how long it really took. But the period of 7 days was a sacred time interval, okay, for the Jewish people of the time. Okay? They had the Sabbath day. Everyone was supposed to rest on the Sabbath day. It was very important. Okay? 7 days was a unit of time people understood, accepted, okay, and it was a great thing to use as an analogy for how long it really took, okay, for the earth to form. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so yeah, sure, on the first day, okay, there was light. Well, okay, that was the first thing to happen. Okay, and on the second day this happened, and well, it wasn't the second day, but it certainly was the second thing to happen. You'll notice that in Genesis, everything follows the same order that I'm showing here. All right, everybody follow? Okay, so about 4 billion years ago, okay, the Earth is starting to cool off enough that gases will start to kind of form around it, forming a primitive atmosphere, which further cools the planet. These gases begin to condense. A lot of them are water. Okay, that rains down on the surface, for further cooling it and forming our oceans. Okay, so life originates, okay, about 3.9 to 3.5 billion years ago. So the Earth was only really solid and cooled, right, for around 1 billion years or so, okay, before life actually started to form. All right, how do we know life formed around that time? We have fossil evidence of it. Okay, micropaleontology is the science of essentially looking for microscopic fossils, and we have microscopic evidence of, okay, primitive organisms essentially that far back. Okay, now, big thing to know here is that this early on Earth is not a very hospitable place. Okay, meteor impacts are still very common, far more common than they are now. Okay, and the atmosphere is primarily carbon dioxide. Okay? In fact, there would have been very little free oxygen in the atmosphere, and a lot of it would have still been methane as well. Okay? If we were to stand on the surface of the Earth at that time, we'd die very quickly. All right? No free oxygen to support us. All right? So the things that lived at that time were very different than the things that live now. Okay? However, some of them carried out a process that turned carbon dioxide into glucose using only sunlight. Okay, the first photosynthetic organisms. There were also a lot of organisms that are what we call methanogens. Okay, methanogens still exist in a few places on Earth, but they're not very plentiful. They use methane as a source of energy. Okay, now they obviously suffered a fairly cataclysmic extinction as the methane was used up in the atmosphere. All right, now go to 2.8 to 2.5 billion years ago, photosynthesizing bacteria are putting lots and lots of oxygen into the atmosphere. And while that's good for us, it was actually very bad for about half of the things that were alive on Earth at the time. Okay? And the Earth's atmosphere reached kind of a tipping point, okay, around this period. It got so much oxygen in it that it became toxic to half of the things that were alive on Earth. Okay? And they died. Mass extinction number 1. Okay, all these things that depended on stuff that didn't involve oxygen were essentially killed off in very short order as the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere increased, and the concentration of carbon dioxide decreased, and the amount of methane available disappeared. All right, so all of that stuff is kind of going on at the same time, but it's set up, okay, the Earth for the more complex organisms that were going to come along. Okay, now this changing in the mixture of the atmosphere also causes a cooling effect, because with less carbon dioxide, there's less of a greenhouse effect. The Earth gets much cooler, and the first ice age grips the Earth, okay, and kills off a lot of things. But some things survive, okay, and the things that survive are more adapted to the new conditions. What do we call that process? This process is evolution over the long term, but the process that causes evolution sort of natural selection. Okay, now those two words, evolution and natural selection, usually get people kind of, crazy about, because they don't like those words in terms of mixing that with religion. But again, okay, and this was explained to me by a priest, so I'm telling you what he told me. Okay, as I said to him, look, I'm going to become a science teacher, Father Dave. I need you to tell me how I can explain evolution and natural selection in a Catholic school. He said, well, you tell it like this. Okay, you tell him first off, God was a smart guy. Okay, everybody should buy that because he was a pretty smart guy. He is a pretty smart guy. Okay, second thing you got to tell him, he had to know that his creation was not static. Okay, that means he knew the earth was going to change. It was a dynamic creation and that things were going to happen to it and it was going to change. If he was going to put life on it, he had to give life the ability to adapt to those changes. Okay, Charles Darwin didn't invent natural selection. God did. Okay, he wanted the stuff that he put on the earth to change with the changes in the earth. Otherwise, it would all die off. And that's not what he wanted. All right, so he gave everything the ability to adapt. He gave it this genetic code. Okay, these genes had variation, and that variation was the potential for things to make it when times get tough. Okay, or when the earth changed. Everybody all right with that? Okay, I know that's kind of the part that people go, really? It's okay to say that? It is. Okay, it's totally okay to say that. All right, now we're up to about 2 billion years ago. Okay, bacteria become more complex. Right now, okay, it's 2 billion years ago. There's not a single multicellular organism on Earth, and everything still lives where? In the ocean. There's nothing on land yet. All right, so this is only 2 billion years ago. Remember, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Okay, 2.1 to 1.9 billion years ago, oxygen's continuing to build. Large single-celled organisms appear. Multi-celled, okay, multicellular organisms are, multicellular life originates. Okay, so multicellular organisms have only been on Earth for just around 2 billion years. Okay, so this is a pretty important step. Now the difference between being single-celled and being multicellular is being specialized. Okay, if you are specialized, that means you have parts of your cell that do a certain job. Another part of your cell that does another job, like the cell diagrams we looked at. Okay, eukaryotic cells like ours, plant and animal cells, okay, have this specialization. Okay, when you have cells that are like that, okay, they can themselves change and specialize to become a certain type of cell. All right, in your body, are all your cells exactly the same? No. Okay, you've got nerve cells, muscle cells, heart cells, okay, cells in your lungs that do certain jobs. All of them are different. They look generally the same, but there are some noticeable differences. Those noticeable differences are specialization. Okay, for example, your muscle cells are very fibrous. They have lots and lots of mitochondria because they need lots and lots of energy. All right, they are specialized to do one thing: move you around. Okay. That means they need to be very strong, very flexible, okay, and they need lots of energy. Now, if you're looking at, let's say, your nerve cells, they're very delicate because they don't need to move you around, okay? They need to transmit information, so they've got to be able to, okay, carry electrical impulses. They need to be very long and have a good surface area to volume ratio. They're specialized to do those jobs, okay? You look at a bacteria. Well, a bacteria is a single-celled organism. It has very few organelles inside, okay, and there's no specialization there at all. All right, so becoming multicellular, that was a big step. The first multicellular organisms were able to overcome the size problem. Okay, we looked at that in the cube lab. You guys remember that? Okay, when we did the cell size activity. If you get to be a big cube or a big cell, you have the problem of diffusion's not fast enough to move stuff for you. But if you become multicellular, all your cells are small and you don't have that problem. Okay, so it allowed organisms to take advantage of being big without paying the price for it. Right? Because very early on, bigger was better. Right? If you were bigger, less things tried to eat you, and you could eat more things. Okay, definitely an advantage. Everybody with me there? Being multicellular allowed you to do both things. All right, move ahead a billion years. Okay, billion years ago. Okay. Multicellular organisms have been around now for 900 million years to a billion years or so. There's this kind of tipping point. Okay, at this tipping point, we start to see real evidence of specialization beyond kind of these colonies of cells. We start to see organisms that have actual different types of tissue. Once that happened, the diversity of life exploded. All right. If you look at this line here, you can see that early on it's very, very thin. Okay? But as we move along, it gets wider and wider, and then it gets here to what we call the Cambrian explosion. Okay? And it gets really, really wide, really, really fast. Okay? That line represents the number of different kinds of organisms living on Earth. Okay? So you can see that for much of Earth's history, there wasn't a lot of variation. There were like, a few different types of things on Earth, and that was it. Okay? But around the Cambrian explosion, suddenly things take off. Okay? And suddenly we see all this variation in form, especially within the animals. Okay? Plants as well, but you really see it in the animals. Okay? We go from having like the sponges to having the first arthropods. Okay? That would be this trilobite looking thing. Okay? The worms, the flatworms, the segmented worms, okay, all of that kind of stuff just really took off after that. Okay? The more variation there was, the faster natural selection could work. Okay? Everybody with me there? Okay? Does that mean it was all like smiles and sunshine for life on Earth? No. Okay? There were several events throughout Earth's history that nearly wiped everything out. Okay? There was, mass extinctions of all kinds, okay, in throughout. What caused them? Okay? It could be anything from supernovas nearby, okay, to asteroid impacts, okay, and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Again, those are all ways that God could pave the way for his final sixth day creation, which was what? Us. Okay? On the sixth day, God created man. Okay? What's the last thing to show up in the fossil record? Us. Okay? We're the most recent thing on Earth. Okay? In fact, if you were to make the 4.6 billion years, if you were to equate that to a 24-hour period, one day, all right, man would show up on Earth at 11:59:59. Okay? 11:59 and 59 seconds. We would have been on Earth for a grand total of 1 second of a 24-hour day. Okay? That's how long we've been around. Because that's all there was. Okay? The Earth, the whole solar system formed by this material collecting and moving towards areas of gravitational influence. Okay? Now, as the planets formed, there was less of that material around, so meteor impacts became less and less frequent. Right? Because those materials were all gathered up. Well, you can't just poof. You know what? It actually is kind of poof. Okay? The first things that would have had to come along would be amino acids and proteins, which are the building blocks, okay, of life and genetic material. All right, I'm going to show you a little video that kind of shows that a little better. But essentially, you can get this organic material from abiotic, non-living beginnings. In the early atmosphere, there was nitrogen. So there was ammonia, there was methane, and there was carbon dioxide. Okay? Experiments have been run in the lab that have shown that when you run an electric current through that gas combination, amino acids will form. Lightning. Lightning through the atmosphere of early Earth caused the formation of early primitive organic compounds. Okay? And they've actually also shown in the lab that when you get some of these organic compounds, sometimes they'll form together in what's called a bubble or a protobiont. It's essentially a primitive cell membrane. Okay? If material is in there, like amino acids and things like that, okay, or nucleic acids and things like that, you start getting the building blocks for a living organism. Okay? Now, we don't know all the answers, but we can see that these chemical processes are at least possible. Okay. You may. Okay? Any other questions on that? Okay? So basically what I'm trying to tell you guys is you don't have to think that evolution, natural selection, and the scientific idea of where Earth came from has to be that different from what you learn in religion class. It isn't. Okay? As long as you're willing to accept that what you learn from the Bible is a metaphor. Okay? A metaphor for what really happened. Okay? An easy way to explain it, okay, to people. All right? Okay, so what distinguishes a multicellular organism from a colony of cells? This is a colony of cells. All the cells in this colony are identical. All right? So is any one of them specialized to do a certain job, or are they all doing all the same jobs? They're all doing the same job. So this is a colony. It's not a true multicellular organism. Okay? In a true multicellular organism, one of these might be doing all of the food gathering. One of them might be doing all the detoxification and membrane repair. Okay, one of them might be doing all of the waste excretion. Okay, and stuff like that. That's getting more towards a multicellular organism. There's this division of labor. All right, so important to remember. Okay, the difference between multicellular organism and a colony is specialization. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to show you that quick video here. All right, so moving on here, guys, with the sort of specialization idea here. Okay, so increasing cellular specialization and division of labor. That's what's needed to get complex multicellular organisms. What we mean by that is this. Okay, cells within the organism started to become a lot different than other cells within the organism. Okay, that means that with different cells you get different types of tissue, and with different types of tissue you get complex organs and organ systems. All right, so you've got specialized organs within your digestive system. Okay, your liver cells, your liver tissue looks different than your muscle tissue. It looks different than your bone tissue and all that kind of stuff. The cells are different because they do a different job. All right, and the more differences you have, the better off you are. Now you can see here on these pictures here, these are the sort of artist's impressions of what early Earth would have looked like. Okay, obviously meteor impact's a lot more common. Okay. What else do you notice here? You got these stromatolites that they showed in the video down here in the bottom corner. Okay, obviously the first kind of complex, well, not complex, but the first life, on Earth. Right? Lots more volcanism. Earth's crust wasn't as thick. Okay, Earth was still cooling, so volcanism was far more prevalent. Okay, but what do you notice about the moon in all these pictures? It's closer. Okay, the moon came from the Earth. All right, the Apollo astronauts, when they went to the moon, brought back samples of moon rocks, from the moon. And testing of those rocks has shown that they are made of the same material as the upper layers of the Earth. The entire moon, that is. Okay, the moon is much lighter than the Earth. Okay, not only because it's smaller, but because it doesn't have a dense iron core like the Earth. Okay, so what they've done is the combination of what the moon rocks are made of and watching what the moon does. When the astronauts were on the moon, another thing they did is they left mirrors on the moon. Okay, and what scientists on Earth do is they fire lasers at these mirrors and they time how long it takes for the lasers to come back. And what they've noticed is that the moon is getting further away from the Earth all the time at a rate of 3 centimeters a year. Okay, I know that doesn't seem like much, okay, but over 3 billion years, that adds up. Okay, so early on, what happened is some other object that was forming in the solar system crossed paths with the Earth, smashed into it. Okay, was a glancing blow, however, it didn't like smash directly, and it hit it kind of on the side and caused a big part of it to be absorbed, but a whole bunch of the surface material to get thrown off. Now, that surface material, was brought together by gravity and formed the moon. All right, and now the moon early on in Earth's history was much closer. Okay, went around the Earth like 5 times a day. Okay, would have been really weird. Okay, moon would have been gigantic in the sky and would have been zipping around. Okay, but obviously it got further and further away all the time, and that's helped a couple of things on Earth. It's helped maintain the tilt of the Earth. It's helped give us our 24-hour day. Okay, and it causes the tides. Right? And the tides were a crucial part of this stromatolite formation. Okay, water comes in, water comes out, and kind of exposes more of them to sunshine. Okay, it comes back in. The tidal areas on Earth were very important areas for life to form. Bigger, yeah. Okay, because it would have pulled harder. The closer an object is, the more gravitational influence it can exert. Okay, so the tides would have been a lot greater when the moon was closer to the Earth.
Just hypothetically, if the moon is so far away from Earth that it had no effect,
Yep.
then would anything really drastic happen?
Well, there'd be no tides. Okay. It's certainly possible. Okay, were the moon to not be here, it would influence how the Earth wobbles. Okay, and if that wobble gets out of control, we're in trouble. Okay, it also steadies our orbit to some extent because the moon pulls on the Earth and the sun pulls on the Earth, and there's kind of a balance there. With the moon gone, we would probably end up moving, or our orbit would wobble more in and out, and that would be bad too. Okay, that would affect our season distribution and the differences between the seasons. They actually did a thing on Nat Geo or Discovery, I can't remember what it was. What would happen if the moon was gone? Okay, it's the day the moon left or something. I can't remember what it was called, but it was really cool. They showed all the effects. It was devastating, the effects it would have if suddenly one day the moon just disappeared. Now, obviously, that would never happen. Okay, but essentially, that's kind of what the premise was. We don't have to worry about that. The moon is moving away very, very slowly. Okay, and it would never move far enough to be lost from the Earth entirely before the sun dies. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay. All right. So examples here. What we want to look at are examples of specialized cells, okay, within a plant. Right, Malcolm? Okay. So this is one example. These are called parenchyma cells. You're never going to have to remember these types of cells. Okay, these are just examples. Parenchyma cells are actually specialized in that they are unspecialized. They can become anything. Okay. These are stem cells. How many people have heard that term before? Okay. The term stem cells actually comes from plants. Okay? These cells are typically found in the stem of the plant, and they can become anything the plant needs. So in the bud that you sometimes see on a plant, okay, in that bud are parenchyma cells. They can become leaf tissue. They can become stem tissue. They can become roots if they need to. All right? They have this ability because they are unspecialized. They become specialized because of a hormone influence. Okay, certain amounts of one hormone, they become leaf tissue. Certain amounts of another hormone, they become roots. They become stem, whatever the plant needs to be. All right. Now, early on in your life, the same thing happened. Okay, and by early on in your life, I mean when you were a collection of about 32 cells. Okay, so a recently fertilized egg. Okay, at that time, all of your cells were exactly the same. All right, every cell in that little clump was exactly the same. But at the 64 cell stage, we start to see specialization happen. Okay, some cells in that ball of 64 cells, okay, start to come under the influence of certain hormones, and they start to become your what we call endoderm, which is your internal organs, your digestive tract, okay, and things like that. Okay, you also have some cells that became what's called mesoderm, and that becomes like your bones and your muscles, okay, your heart, okay, things like that. And then you've got stuff that's called ectoderm, okay, that's the outer layer. The ectoderm actually rolls into a tube and becomes your brain and spinal cord, and some of it also becomes your skin, okay, and all of these things kind of work together. They become specialized at that point. So if you were to look at a cell, or a group of 64 cells in a fertilized egg, okay, if you took some of those cells out that were, let's say, destined to become the liver, from those cells you could grow liver tissue. Okay, if you took the ones out that were going to become the brain, okay, you could grow nervous tissue. You can't grow a brain. Okay, don't get the idea that if I throw these on a dish 3 days later, a brain will be there. Okay, that's not the way it works. All right, but you can grow the tissue that those cells would become. All right, that's the whole idea behind the use of stem cells, is that you can grow the tissue you need. Okay, and there's been studies done, not in Canada, not in the U.S., because we don't allow that type of research in Canada and the U.S. Okay, but in other countries they have done essentially effective transplants of stem cell tissue onto people. Okay, the most common one is transfer of pancreatic tissue into diabetics. Okay, and that healthy pancreatic tissue can make insulin and reduce or eliminate a diabetic's need for insulin shots. Okay, because they now have grafted onto their pancreas pancreatic cells that actually make insulin. Okay, everybody follow me there? All right, now, why don't we in Canada and the U.S. allow stem cell research? Right. The only way you get those cells is by killing a fetus. All right, you essentially abort that fetus. If you take the cells out of that fetus that are going to become its liver, it can't live. All right, so you have to essentially cause an abortion to happen, and that's why, okay, we don't allow that in Canada and the U.S. Okay, and obviously that's why we as Catholics don't like the idea of what we call embryonic stem cell research. Okay, there are other kinds of stem cells that can be taken from your own body, okay, as an adult and used to grow things, but they don't work nearly as well, okay, as embryonic stem cells do. The brain would be a tough one because the sections of the brain are so specialized. Just grafting general nerve tissue into a spot where you had taken a tumor would probably not work in the way we would like it to. Okay? Whereas if you have an organ like the liver that's a little bit more general, it might work there. Okay, or on the pancreas. But because one part of your brain is responsible for doing a certain thing, grafting general brain nerve tissue over that probably wouldn't do the same job. Right. Caroline, question? Yes. Okay. In fact, a lot of people are doing that. We, from our second son, took the umbilical tissue, and it's being stored. Okay, you call that cord blood banking, and it contains stem cells, embryonic ones. They're good. Okay, they're really good for growing stuff. If our son ever needs something like that, we can go and take that tissue and have it colonized or grown, okay, in order to grow new tissue, theoretically. Okay, so that is becoming more and more popular. All right, so essentially what they do is they take the afterbirth, the stuff that comes out after the baby, okay, that was in the uterus, that was part of the uterine lining and the umbilical cord system, and you can use that, the placental cells. No, the parenchyma cells are like the group of 64 unspecialized cells. Okay, the umbilical cord contains some of that type of cell, but it's not truly, like, parenchyma cells really only exist in a plant. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, within a plant, we also have to have cells that are specialized for transporting water and for transporting sugar. Okay, because those are the two resources that a plant's got to move. It's got to move water up, it's got to move sugar down, because those two resources are needed in the opposite place that they are available. All right, water is not available in the leaf, but that's where it's needed. Okay, by the same token, sugar is needed by the roots because they can't carry out photosynthesis. But sugar is produced in the leaves, so it's got to move down to the roots. Okay, so these two resources are constantly moving past each other in the stem of the plant. If you're going to make tubes within the plant that can carry this stuff and not leak, you need certain types of cells. Okay, and these cells are specially shaped so that they make tight, water-tight seals, okay, against each other, and essentially create these tubes that we call the xylem and the phloem, which we'll look at in a little while. Okay. Okay, food-conducting cells, they got to be a little bit bigger. All right, because the sap that contains the sugar, that's the sticky sap that you sometimes see on the outside of a tree or get on your fingers. Okay, that's the sap that contains the sugar. All right, the tubes that transport that have to be a lot different, and they have to have kind of sieve plates in them. Okay, these sieve plates essentially make sure that crystals of sugar don't start to form, because if that happens, they'll get bigger and they'll block the tubes. So these sieve plates use the weight of the sap above to break up crystals, okay, against these plates so that they can go through. All right. All right, leaf structure. This is the best place where you can see an example of different kinds of cells doing different jobs. Okay, is in the leaf of a plant. All right. On the outside of the plant, both top and bottom, okay, there are these cells called the epidermal cells. Okay, so the upper epidermis. They have essentially one job. They secrete this waxy material that covers the leaves. If you've ever touched the leaves of a plant, you know they feel a little bit waxy. All right, that wax seals water into the plant. It does not allow it to evaporate from every surface of the plant, because if that was the case, plants would dry out in no time at all. Okay, everybody follow me there? All right, the only place that we want to have water evaporate from a plant is from these tiny little holes, okay, called stomates, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, but these upper cells are essentially transparent. They don't really have any like chloroplasts and things like that in them, because their job is to secrete this waxy cuticle and hold the water in. Okay, right underneath those epidermal cells are the cells you looked at in the cell anatomy lab the other day. Okay, these rectangular ones. All right, these are called the palisade cells. All right, palisade cells they're called palisade cells because they're like a rock formation called palisade layers. Okay, that are essentially columns of rock, but these are columns of cells stacked really, really close to each other. Okay, the purpose of the palisade layer is to carry out photosynthesis. That's why the cells are so tightly packed. You want as many cells as possible packed in on this layer because that's the top of the leaf. And the top of the leaf is where the sun hits. Okay, so this is the main photosynthetic layer of the plant. So those cells are specialized to be tightly packed, full of chloroplasts, and able to carry out lots and lots of photosynthesis. Okay, underneath that layer, you'll see what's called the spongy layer. Okay, in there are cells that are like the palisade layer, except they're not nearly as tightly packed. In fact, there are big spaces in between them, just like if you looked at a sponge. Okay, if you cut a sponge and you can see inside, there's lots of porous kind of spaces within it. Everybody with me there? Okay, the job of those cells, okay, is to essentially capture water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen in the spaces between the cells. Okay, because those are the resources needed by the palisade layer. Okay, carbon dioxide comes in through the stomates into this layer, and it's absorbed by the palisade cells to carry out photosynthesis. Same with the water. Okay, as the photosynthesis occurs, water evaporates out through the stomates. Okay, so does oxygen. It goes out through the stomates as well. All right, so this spongy layer is responsible for essentially capturing and releasing the necessary gases for photosynthesis. All right, and then underneath there, you see again another epidermal layer, but on the bottom, there are these special little things called the stomates. Okay, and the stomates themselves are made of special cells that can change their shape in order to open and close the stomates. Okay, so again, more specialization. Each one of these cells looks different because each one of these cells or types of cells has a different job. Okay, everybody with me so far there? Okay, this leaf one here, put a star beside this. This is an important diagram. Okay, being able to know the parts of the leaf and what they do. We're going to go over it again. I'll go over it again, but okay, make sure you look at that one. It's an important one. Okay. All right, so again, here's the diagram again. Okay, substances enter and leave the leaf through two different routes, veins and stomates. Okay, stomates allow water, vapor, okay, oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out. The veins, okay, bring water into the leaf from the roots, okay, and they take the sugar down to the roots. All right, so the inside of the veins are transporting the water up. The outside of the veins are transporting the sugar down. Okay, and we'll talk about those in a little while. Okay, but again, you see the palisade cells here. You see the stomates in the epidermal layer. You see the spongy layer. Okay, again, all the cells look different because they're doing different jobs. Okay, now the stomates, okay, these cells that can open and close, okay, they open and close these holes in the leaf, okay. The importance of that is this controls the amount of water lost by the plant. Between the stomates and the waxy cuticle, that's how a plant controls its water loss. Okay, so what happens is this. When the plant has got lots of water, the water vacuoles in these cells really get full, okay? And they push the cell so that it assumes this bean shape, okay? When it's shaped like this and it has tons of water in it, the stomate is open because the cells have so much pressure that they can't fit tightly against each other anymore, okay? It would be like if you had two inflated balloons and you tried to make them fit in a perfect line with no space in between. Okay, it'd be very hard, all right, because they already have kind of a shape, all right. But as they get less and less air in them, it's easy to stick them flat against each other, all right. Same for these. As they lose water, the vacuoles start to empty, and when they start to empty, the bean shape disappears because there's not as much water pressure inside, and the stomate closes. All right, it's not something the plant consciously does. It's just something that happens as water evaporates from the plant. As water evaporates from the plant, the water vacuoles empty out and the stomate closes. Okay? Once the stomate is closed, the plant stops carrying out photosynthesis. All right? It can't carry out photosynthesis if water is not evaporating, carbon dioxide and oxygen are not coming and going. And that doesn't happen if the stomates are closed. All right? So it's actually a pretty clever process, okay, that opens and closes. Okay? It closes when the plant doesn't have enough water naturally. Okay, when the plant's got lots of water, they're open and it's carrying out lots and lots of photosynthesis. Put a star beside this one. I always ask a question about this on the unit exam. I always ask, what are the 2 ways a plant can conserve water? Waxy cuticle, stomates, and explain how they both work. Always, always ask that. Yep. Okay, these 4 questions, I want you to quickly answer them. Okay, complete sentences here. Okay, and then we'll go through them in a couple of minutes. All right, let's have a look at these questions here. So, why was multicellularity so superior to being single-celled? Why would they have such an advantage? There's a few reasons. Okay, to some extent, yeah. I mean, single-celled organisms can adapt as well, right? They're just not as complex. Okay, the big places where being multicellular is an advantage is in specialization. Okay, if you have specialization, you do the jobs you have to do better because you have cells specifically designed to do them, as opposed to a single-celled organism that has to do all the jobs all with one cell. Okay, it's not doing any of them as well as a multicellular organism would. The second thing, bigger is better. If you're multicellular, you could get big without the surface area to volume problem. Okay, and being bigger meant less things tried to eat you, and you had a much wider kind of gamut of things you could eat. Okay, because you were bigger. All right, so allowed them to get bigger, and they were far more efficient because of their specialization. Okay, how are the cells of the leaf different from cells found in the stem of a plant? Well, generally, the cells in the leaf have to do what job? Photosynthesis, whereas the cells in the stem are not so much about photosynthesis and more about support. Okay, so cells in the stem are going to be stronger, more fibrous, okay, and be more about strength than ones in the leaf that are simply about let's get tightly packed, have lots of chloroplasts, and carry out as much photosynthesis as we can. They're different because they have different jobs. Okay, describe how the epidermis and the stomates have similar jobs. Every unit exam ever has had some variation of that question. Okay, what do? They both control water loss from the plant. Okay, the cuticle makes sure that water loss only happens through the stomates. And the stomates control how much water gets in and out of them. Okay, because they can open and close based on how much water there is in their water vacuoles. Okay, the changes in that turgor pressure, all right, are very important for limiting the amount of water that is lost from a plant. Okay, describe how the stomate works. Well, we just kind of talked about that. Okay, as a plant loses water, the stomates lose their ability, or the guard cells, they're called, around the stomate, lose their ability to maintain that bean shape, and when they do, the stomate closes. Okay, and that prevents any more evaporation, but it also prevents any more photosynthesis from going on. Okay, so, and when the plant picks up more water, so let's say overnight while the sun's not shining and the roots can catch up, okay, those water vacuoles fill up and the stomate opens again. Okay, but during the day, as the water evaporates, the stomates will close off. Right? Okay, so hang on to that stuff, guys, because there's important stuff in there in terms of things I might ask later.